There's something hollow in the way we live now. You wake up tired. You smile when you're empty. You scroll through curated lives that look nothing like yours and wonder if everyone else got the manual, except you. But you push forward. You keep playing your role, telling yourself this is just what adulthood feels like. Functional, silent, disconnected. You're not in crisis, but you're not alive either. You're surviving in costume, and no one ever taught you how much that costs. Carl Jung tried to. He mapped the structure of the human soul and warned us what would happen when we forgot it. The mask we wear, the ego we serve, the shadow we fear, the self we abandon. These weren't metaphors. They were psychological facts. And today, we're paying the price for ignoring them. You're not lost because you're broken. You're lost because you were trained to forget who you are. This world rewards performance, but it punishes depth. It teaches you to fear silence, to avoid your truth, to run from the very parts of you that are trying to bring you home. But what if nothing's wrong with you? What if the anxiety, the burnout, the numbness are all signs that the real you is still alive, buried but unbroken? This video is not self-help. It's a descent, a return to the core. We're going to walk through each layer of your psyche, persona, ego, shadow, and self, exactly as Jung laid them out. Not as theory, but as lived reality. By the end of this journey, you'll see why you feel the way you do. And more importantly, you'll know what to do with it. So take a breath. You won't need to perform here. Just stay. And if this speaks to something inside you, don't forget to like and subscribe. You didn't build the mask out of vanity. You built it because no one clapped for your truth. You were too loud, too soft, too strange, too intense. So you started shaving off pieces of yourself just to fit into rooms that never felt safe. At first, it felt smart, strategic even. Smile at the right time. Hide the anger. Say what they want to hear. It kept you alive. It kept you employed. It kept you in relationships. But over time, the mask stopped feeling like something you wore and started feeling like all you had left. Jung called this adaptation the persona, a necessary disguise we create to navigate society. But when the disguise becomes the identity, you don't just lose sight of yourself. You become a stranger in your own body. The world rewards the mask. It's profitable to be polite. It's attractive to be agreeable. It's easier to be digestible. So you smile when you're exhausted. You nod while your stomach tightens. You go along with things that bruise your soul because resistance feels dangerous, and the world keeps applauding. But deep down, something starts to rot. A subtle nausea. A silent scream. Not loud enough to break your life, but constant enough to hollow it. You keep functioning, but the joy fades. You keep loving, but it feels performative. You keep showing up, but part of you stays missing. Jungian psychology doesn't call this burnout. It calls it fragmentation. And what dies slowly inside you isn't just energy. It's the authentic self you were never given permission to be. This is the trap. The more perfectly you wear the mask, the more invisible you become beneath it. People love you, but only for the version you've manufactured. Friends admire your strength, not realizing it's just silence dressed in armor. Co-workers respect your productivity, never seeing the panic that powers it. And relationships? You give and give and give, hoping someone will notice the parts you're not allowed to speak. But no one can meet the real you if you've buried them to survive, and so the loneliness begins. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that lives inside a crowded room. It's a quiet type of starvation. You become a ghost in your own story, haunting your own life, applauded by everyone but yourself. And here's where it gets dangerous. You start believing the applause. You confuse performance with identity. You forget what rest feels like when it's not earned. You lose the language for your own needs. And when your body screams, through anxiety, insomnia, chronic tension. You call it weakness. You blame yourself for breaking under pressure, never realizing the pressure was a mask too tight to breathe in. That's why healing feels confusing. Taking off the mask doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like exposure, vulnerability, rejection. But it's not weakness. It's return. It's your soul trying to remember its original shape. And if you need support for that return, I've left some powerful material for you in the first comment pinned below. Take your time, but don't look away. Sometimes, the cracks begin with a sentence you can't unhear, a memory that tastes too bitter, a question that won't leave you alone. What happened to the person I was becoming before I learned to disappear? These aren't signs of collapse. They're signs of awakening. Your inner self isn't dead. It's dormant, buried beneath years of pleasing, pretending, surviving. And it wants out. But freedom doesn't begin with noise. It begins with noticing. One pause, one breath, one moment where you choose not to lie, just for today. And in that space, something shifts. You don't explode. You don't collapse. You just become slightly more real. And that's where soul healing begins. Not with declarations, but with decisions. You don't need to destroy the persona. You don't need to run from it either. You need to see it for what it is, a clever creation, a shield you outgrew. You can still use it when the world demands it, but you no longer have to believe it's all you are. You are the softness behind the smile, the rage beneath the silence, the poetry inside the performance. And once you remember that, you stop needing to be understood by everyone, because you've finally come home to yourself. That's what Jung meant by individuation. Not becoming someone new, but becoming someone true. And even if it costs you the approval of the crowd, the reunion is worth the exile. And when you finally stand there, unmasked, barefaced in a world addicted to costume, you'll feel it. The silence, the judgment, the discomfort. But you'll also feel something else. Breath, ground, pulse. You'll feel alive. And you'll begin to notice something terrifying and beautiful. You were never too much. You were just never seen by people who knew how to hold your truth. Let them go. You weren't born to entertain them. You were born to remember yourself. Because once the mask slips, something older and wilder awakens in the dark. A voice that trembles but speaks. A self that shakes but stands. And if that voice is rising inside you now, tell me, what part of your mask is ready to fall? Leave it in the comments. There's a voice inside you that sounds rational, measured, responsible. It plans, it compares, it negotiates your entire existence. You call it maturity. You call it being realistic. But what if that voice isn't you? What if it's just the manager of your pain, the ego, standing at the door of your unconscious, terrified of what might come out? Jung never said the ego was evil. He said it was small, a fragment, a survival mechanism pretending to be a soul. And when the mask of the persona begins to fall, the ego panics. It tightens its grip. Be careful. Stay strong. Don't feel that. But behind every rule it whispers, there's a fear it refuses to name. You feel it most when life stops following the script. A breakup, a layoff, a silence that lingers too long. That's when the ego starts spinning. You should have tried harder. You're not good enough. You'll end up alone. It doesn't say these things to hurt you. It says them to keep you in control. Because the ego fears one thing above all: collapse. It thinks that if it stops running the show, everything will fall apart. But here's the twist. Most people aren't afraid of failure. They're afraid of what will rise inside them once their identity stops performing. The grief, the rage, the hunger, the truth. The ego builds fences to keep those things buried, and then calls that numbness balance. This voice shows up in daily life with quiet precision. It's the worker who never rests because rest feels like laziness. The mother who never asks for help because needing support feels like weakness. The man who stays silent in therapy because speaking would make it real. These aren't personality traits. They're defense mechanisms wrapped in logic. The ego is brilliant at pretending that survival is virtue. But Jung saw it differently. He knew that beneath the perfectionism, the people-pleasing, the cold detachment, lives a mind trying not to remember. Remember what? That being in control isn't the same as being whole. That feeling safe isn't the same as feeling free. And that logic, without integration, is just fear in disguise. The ego is loudest when you're on the edge of something real. That's when it rushes in with self-doubt, distraction, endless planning. Anything to keep you away from stillness. Because in stillness, you hear what you've buried. You remember what you forgot. And the ego knows it can't survive that kind of silence. So it performs. It over-explains. It multitasks. It feeds off productivity like a drug. Not because you're ambitious, but because your nervous system never learned how to feel safe doing nothing. That's why so many high performers feel secretly empty. It's not burnout. It's spiritual malnourishment. And no amount of hustle will feed a soul starved of truth. This hunger leaks into everything. Into the relationships where you can't say what you really need. Into the nights where you can't sleep without the TV humming. Into the achievements that taste hollow the moment they're reached. The ego keeps score, but never feels satisfied. It measures success by how much you've avoided failure. It defines love by how well you hide your wounds. But here's what no one tells you. The ego was never meant to define you. It was meant to serve you. To orient, not imprison. And once it becomes the master, your life turns into a performance, and your mind into a battlefield. And that's when you start to wonder if the enemy is out there, or in here. But this isn't where the story ends, because there's a crack in the armor. A moment, maybe even now, when the voice of the ego doesn't hit the same. It sounds tired, repetitive, hollow. That's not failure, that's awakening. When Jung spoke of ego death, he wasn't talking about destruction. He meant remembering that the structure holding your life together was always temporary. That losing control isn't the end of you. It's the beginning of something deeper. Something that doesn't need applause to breathe. Something that watches the ego spin and doesn't flinch, because truth doesn't panic. It waits, patiently, for you to stop performing. This part of the journey is disorienting. You might lose the desire to explain yourself. You might stop reacting to what used to trigger you. You might feel the urge to walk away from things that once defined you. That's not collapse. That's clarity. That's the individuation process beginning to root itself inside you. You're not becoming someone new. You're becoming someone whole, someone real. Someone who doesn't need the world's validation to feel legitimate. And yes, it will scare people, especially those who benefited from your compliance. Let them go. You're not their mirror anymore. And when the ego finally quiets, something else rises. A shadow, a pulse, a forgotten fragment from the dark. You might call it pain, or memory, or shame. But Jung had another name for it, the shadow. And it carries everything you've buried to survive, everything the ego was trying to protect you from. So let me ask you, what is your ego still afraid you'll feel if you stop controlling everything? Tell me in the comments. I'll meet you there. Not everything you bury stays dead. Some things grow in the dark, silently, patiently, waiting for the right moment to return. That's what Jung called the shadow, the parts of you that were once natural, but became dangerous to display. The rage that made you ungrateful, the fear that made you weak, the desire that made you too much. So you pushed them down, smiled through them, dressed them up as logic. And for a while, it worked. The world applauded your restraint. You were praised for being mature, chill, easy to deal with. But inside, something started decaying. Because repression doesn't erase, it incubates. And sooner or later, what you lock away comes back, with teeth. The shadow doesn't only live in violent outbursts or dark secrets. It shows up in everyday life, in sarcasm that bites a little too hard, in the envy that makes you shrink someone else's joy, in the way you judge others for embodying what you secretly crave. It's in your passive aggressiveness, in your addictions, in the people you can't stand without knowing why. The shadow leaks out not because you're evil, but because you're fragmented. And what leaks is what longs to be seen. Jung said the shadow isn't the enemy, it's the rejected twin. It carries the emotional charges you weren't allowed to hold. And when ignored, it doesn't disappear. It hijacks your relationships, your patterns, your identity. You can see it clearly in moments of projection. You meet someone confident and instantly label them arrogant. You watch someone express desire and call it shameful. You see someone rest and feel the need to work harder. That's not logic. That's the shadow playing dress-up, and it always disguises itself as morality, superiority, or righteousness, because it knows your ego listens to those voices. But here's the secret. What you react to most intensely in others is often a reflection of what you've exiled within yourself. And the more you judge, the more control it gains. Shadow work isn't about self-blame. It's about recognizing that what disturbs you is guiding you. But there's another figure in this hidden terrain, more elusive than the shadow, yet just as powerful. Jung called it the anima, for men, and the animus, for women. The inner opposite. The soul image buried beneath the mask and the ego. The anima is your intuition, vulnerability, creativity, longing. The animus is your clarity, structure, voice, boundary. When these archetypes are repressed, you feel empty and confused, like something essential is missing. And often, we try to fill that hole by falling obsessively in love with people who embody what we've lost access to. That's not romance. That's projection. Your soul isn't looking for a partner. It's looking for itself. This explains why certain people haunt us, not because of who they are, but because of what they represent. They become mirrors, showing us the unlived life we've locked away. And that's why their absence hurts so deeply. You're not just grieving them. You're grieving the part of you that awakened in their presence. That's the sacred function of the anima. She calls you inward. She brings dreams, symbols, images, and longings that don't follow logic. She's irrational, emotional, wild, and she terrifies the ego because she can't be controlled. But ignoring her is what leads to the numb, gray life so many people silently endure. A life that looks fine, but feels like slow suffocation. The deeper you go into shadow work, the more disoriented you'll feel. You might question everything, your career, your marriage, your values. And that's not a sign that you're lost. It's a sign that the version of you who was pretending is dissolving. And yes, it's scary. That's why most people don't go this far. They stop at self-improvement. They go to therapy to fix a symptom, not to meet the root. But if you're still here, still watching, still listening, it means something inside you wants more than performance. It wants integration, not to erase the shadow, but to give it a name, a place, and a voice. Because once it's seen, it stops screaming. The path forward isn't linear. Some days you'll feel clear. Others, you'll feel like you're drowning. Old memories will resurface. Old defense mechanisms will tempt you. People will misunderstand you. But don't stop. Because beneath the debris, something is forming. A new center, not the mask, not the ego, not the shadow alone, but a wholeness built from every piece you've reclaimed. That's not a concept. It's a felt experience. And once you taste it, you'll never settle for fragments again. Not in love, not in work, not in how you treat yourself. The self that's emerging now is the one you've been circling your entire life. And when that self begins to rise, it doesn't scream. It listens. It doesn't beg to be seen. It sees. It doesn't chase love. It becomes the place where love returns. That's the beginning of the real transformation. But you're not done yet. Because even after meeting your shadow, there's still one question left. Can you hold all that you are without needing to perform any of it? Let that question breathe inside you. And if something stirred in you during this descent, some buried memory, a truth long avoided, bring it to the comments. I want to hear what part of your shadow is finally ready to come home. There's a silence inside you that isn't emptiness. It's the voice that was always there, before the mask, before the ego, before the world taught you to fragment yourself into digestible pieces. Jung called this voice the self, not the personality, not the social identity, not the story you tell others at parties. The self is older than all of that. It doesn't perform. It doesn't panic. It watches, waits, holds. And it's been whispering to you all along, through gut feelings, through dreams, through the strange ache you feel when your life looks fine but doesn't feel like yours. You haven't been lost. You've just been too noisy to hear it. The self doesn't demand perfection. It demands integration. It wants you to feel rage without becoming cruel, to feel desire without becoming addicted, to feel fear without becoming frozen. That's the heart of individuation. Not cleansing yourself of flaws, but weaving every contradiction into something coherent, something human, something holy. Most people never reach this point. They stay loyal to their masks, or their wounds, or their pride. But if you've come this far, if you've met your shadow, questioned your ego, taken off the persona, then you're standing at the edge of something rare, the return to your original center. Not to become someone new, but to finally rest in the one you've always been. It won't feel like fireworks. It will feel like a breath you didn't know you were holding. It will feel like standing in a room alone and not needing to be anywhere else. Like saying no without justifying it. Like choosing peace without earning it. Like losing people and still not losing yourself. This is what the authentic self knows, that your worth was never in your performance, that your soul never needed permission, that your depth isn't a flaw, it's a compass. And once you touch this knowing, you stop trying to be understood by the world. You start choosing people, places, and paths that already resonate with who you are beneath the noise. But even here, the world doesn't stop spinning. You'll still feel the pressure to perform, to fit in, to shrink. You'll still be tempted to run back to the ego's routines. That's part of the journey. Integration doesn't mean erasing your patterns. It means relating to them differently. From the self, not the survival script. You'll still get triggered, still feel fear, still want control. But now there's space around it, a watcher behind the reaction, a center that doesn't collapse every time the wind changes. That's the real miracle. Not invincibility, but presence. Not control, but clarity. Not disappearance, but depth. And yes, people might not recognize you anymore. They'll say you've changed. You'll seem quieter, more distant, less invested in drama. That's not distance. That's self-possession. And it will repel those who only knew you through your wounds. But it will magnetize those who've been waiting to meet the version of you that doesn't need to prove anything. This is when life begins to rearrange itself around your inner alignment. The job you once begged for no longer fits. The relationship you tolerated begins to feel foreign. You start moving from your core, and the world either rises to meet you or falls away. Either way, you stop chasing what was never yours, because the self doesn't chase. It attracts. It doesn't scream. It resonates. It doesn't dominate. It integrates. That's why spiritual awakening isn't always bliss. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's rage. But through all of it, there's a knowing underneath the noise. I don't have to become anything. I just have to return. And return you will. Over and over again. Not because you're broken, but because the path back to your center is the path of remembering. And remembering is a sacred practice. So if something inside you feels quieter now, more whole, more still, don't rush past it. Stay with it. Let it anchor. Let it speak. And then ask yourself slowly, with no need to answer out loud, what does it feel like to finally come home? If you've caught even a glimpse of that answer, tell me what shifted, what fell away, what returned. Leave it in the comments. I'd be honored to read your truth. Most people will watch a video like this, nod quietly, and go back to sleep. Back to the mask. Back to the ego. Back to the routines that keep them polished on the outside and hollow on the inside. But you don't have to. What you've just walked through wasn't entertainment. It was a blueprint, a guide back to your center. And now the real question begins. Not, did this resonate with you? But, what will you do with what you now know? What mask are you still afraid to take off? What shadow have you been pretending not to see? What part of you still believes that control is safer than truth? And what would it mean to finally come home to yourself? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're spiritual invitations. So take a moment, right now, and share one truth in the comments. Something you've been carrying, something you've been hiding. Let this be your first act of returning. I'll be there reading, listening, witnessing. And if this felt like the beginning of a deeper journey, you're not alone. Every week we dive into themes like this: Jungian psychology, shadow work, soul healing, and spiritual awakening. So if you haven't yet, subscribe and turn on the notifications. There's so much more waiting for you here. And when you're ready to go even deeper, check the first comment pinned below. I left something there to help you take this work further. Not as homework, but as a sacred next step. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're just remembering.